Hello, welcome to Only for Your Ears, and welcome to episode 5, which is called The Princess and the Pea. I have renamed it to The Prince Found His Princess Like Two Peas in a Pod. The structure will remain the same. First, we'll do the summary and the highlight the most important points. Second, a critical review on how this particular story plays in society today. And third, we'll do the trigger points. Let's begin. Once upon a time, there was a prince who wanted to marry a princess, but she'd have to be a real princess. But of course, I digress here. He wanted to marry someone of a royal lineage, basically a blue blood. He travelled all over the world to find one, but nowhere could he get what he wanted. There were princesses galore, but it was difficult to find out whether they were real ones. There was always something about them that was not as it should be. So he came back home empty-handed and was sad. But he would have liked very much to have found a real princess. I digress here. I get the feeling the prince didn't know what he was really looking for. He just wanted someone to fulfill a role with the features of a princess, but no real love. Sounds like Prince Charles to me. One evening, a terrible storm came on. There was a rumble of thunder and lightning, and the rain poured down in torrents. Suddenly, a knocking was heard at the city gate, and the old king went to open it. It was a princess standing outside in front of the gate. I digress here again. How does the king know the young woman at the door is a princess? Was she wearing a crown? But gracious, what a sight the rain and the wind made her look like. The water ran down her hair and clothes. Quite frankly, she looked like a mop waiting to be squeezed out. It ran down into her toes of her shoes and out again at the heels, and yet she said she was a real princess. Well, well, soon find out, said the old queen. I digress. So desperate for an heir, they were willing to accept anything the young woman said. But she said nothing, went into the bedroom, took all the bedding off the bedstead, and laid a pea on the bottom. Then she took 20 mattresses and laid them on the pea, and then 20 eiderdown beds on top of the mattresses. On this, the princess had to lie all night. In the morning, she was asked how she had slept. Oh, very badly, she said. I have scarcely closed my eyes all night. I digress. She sounds like an ungrateful, spoilt brat. God only knows what was in the bed, but I was lying on something hard, so that I'm black and blue all over my body. It's horrible. I digress. She's exhibiting the negative traits of a princess unbecoming. Now they knew that she was a real princess because she had left the pea right through the night. She had felt the pea right through the night, through the 20 mattresses and eiderdowns. Nobody but a real princess could be as sensitive as that. Well, as far as I'm concerned, I don't think that's enough to know if someone is a real princess. There are plenty of sensitive people in the world that aren't necessarily a princess. So the prince took her for his bride and took her for his wife. But now he knew that he had a real princess, and the pea was put in the museum where it may still be seen if no one has stolen it yet. There, that's a true story. What an interesting story. The prince went all over the world in search of the perfect princess, and in reality, she was right under his nose in the middle of a thunderstorm. Well, let's take a look at critical review and how this story plays in society today. I believe this story is about a prince who wasn't necessarily interested in looking for love, for true love anyway. He wanted someone that had the trappings of the title, and and he wanted someone who was going to be an obedient lady that would follow royal protocol and produce an heir and a spare. This story, in some ways, describes the power couplings in today's society: prestige, status, and money. Whether it could be old money or new money is not important. There's a sense amongst the elite of society that love can be a bit of an inconvenience. That's why the prenup agreements have been drawn up to not interfere with each partner's capital. In a lot of ways, marriage amongst the elite is approached like a business contract. Let's take a look at some of the sentences I chose to frame my review. The prince travelled all over the world to find his true love. I digress here, people. This reminds me of the film Coming to America. It's about an African king who's looking for a wife in the USA. However, he doesn't just want any woman. He wants someone that truly loves him, not for his title or money, but as a person. In other words, he doesn't want a fake person. However, both princesses get what they want in the end. But in Coming to America, Eddie Murphy's character disguises himself as an ordinary man because he really wants his chosen partner to love him for who he truly is and not for his title. Whereas in The Princess and the Pea, the prince would never make this type of sacrifice to find his princess. He would travel the world, but he would never disguise himself under a humble identity without removing his royal lineage identity. The quality is very different between the two. There were princesses galore, but it was difficult to tell if they were real. I digress here again, people. I get the feeling the prince didn't know what he wanted or was looking for. He just wanted someone to fulfill the role with the features of a princess, but not real love. Sounds like Prince Charles to me. Well, talking of Prince and King Charles, his first princess turned out to be a glorious success, but this irritated him immensely. Why? Let me just say this. Princess Diana was perceived as a coy, innocent pushover. Boy, were the royal family wrong. Diana was a charismatic, compassionate, extremely clever, cultured, and artistically talented and strong. She genuinely loved Charles, but he was in love with Camilla and apparently had a roving eye as well. Charles and the royal family wanted Diana to be like a quiet, empty Barbie doll, to be mindlessly obedient, to be totally devoted to him without ever reciprocating any sense of affection back. How awful. while Princess Diana was left like rotten fish, decaying in the glow of fake of a fake marriage. The next slide here. He sensed there was something about them that was not as it should be. I digress here again. Did he really sense there was something wrong, or was it that they didn't measure up to his impossible, unspecific standards? Maybe there was something wrong with him. Exactly. All these potential suitors had to please this flaky prince, and no matter how they twisted themselves into a pretzel to appeal to his inability to make a choice. This reminds me of Ben Affleck and the two Jennifers. He was really happy with Jennifer Garner, even though he had never gotten over his intrigue with the dominant J. Lo. One gave him love and stability, and the other one he wanted, and the other basically appealed appealed to his need for someone to affirm who he was as a person. But he was an indecisive man. He didn't know what he really wanted, Ben Affleck. And even today, years after their divorce to Jennifer Garner, he says, the biggest mistake that I ever made in my life was divorcing Jennifer Garner. He said she was a princess. I digress. So desperate for an heir, they were willing to accept anything the young woman said. I'm a princess, the young woman demands. I know someone once who I am, so I'll say I'm a princess, whether it's true or not. This oddly reminds me of Sarah Palin. The vice presidential candidate, Sarah Palin, joined John McCain. He was so desperate to have somebody on the ticket to see if he could stop the inevitable plane crash that happened in his election night defeat in 2008. And notice how everybody scrambled around to please and accommodate her without question, except for the mother in the story. I get the feeling that they were relieved just to hear her say that I'm a princess. And the fact that she acted like an unappreciative, spoilt brat after all they had done for her. The search had exhausted the prince, and he would have settled for anyone that appeared to be what he wanted. Take me, I'm soaking wet, and I need to be rescued. I'm a princess. Now let's take a look at the trigger points. Okay, so the trigger points are really about things or events from our past, traumatic and sad and psychological events from our past that come back to haunt us in the present. And if we are not aware of these triggers, we will allow ourselves to be taken back into the past and into past behavioral patterns that cause a lot of problems and inevitably cause us to stay back in the past after we've made such great progress to be in our present and move into the future. Let's take a look at some of the triggers that I felt running through the storyline a bit. One of the triggers for me was Prince Charles and Camilla's relationship and how Camilla gravely underestimated Diana. She actually handpicked Lady Di to get engaged to Charles because he was desperate They were desperate to find a princess for him, and she had to be a virgin. The most important part, she had to be a virgin. Camilla was obviously not a virgin, and she'd had a relationship with Charles for many, many years before that, before he got married. Thinking that she was just some brain dead bimbo who had no talent and would crinkle like the soft material on a humid summer's day. Just because someone appears to be soft and feminine, it doesn't mean they're a pushover. She had enormous soft skills and was a great communicator, even though she had two elder siblings. She took her parents' divorce the hardest, and it unfortunately kept her in a state of arrested development. So I get the feeling that because she suffered from a lack of emotional and psychological development, she was written off as not being too bright. Therefore, she was breathtakingly underestimated as a person without intelligence. As a person, I was and have been for a long time. This is hopefully changing. I was unconsciously and consciously triggered for a long time by how the royal family used to treat Diana as though she was not the sharpest tool in the shed. Why? Because I've experienced this most of my life. Plus, I also suffered from a stunted, arrested development and self growth. It's not until she and I started to feel more confident about who she or I was our self-esteem developed enough that our hidden talents revealed themselves, much to everybody else's chagrin. Therefore, it awakened awareness where people begrudgingly had to realize that this person wasn't a bimbo after all. Not so stupid after all. What a pity. But it took a long time for that to happen. However, she could be cutthroatly manipulative with the media. This is Lady Diana. She knew how to play the press like a fiddle. Unfortunately, just as she evolved into a mature woman and was able to live a happy life as an independent person, her life was cut short. But she was at least she reversed the trigger of being written off as dumb in the eyes of the world. I mean, she was considered dumb in the eyes of the world for a long time until she changed this. I wasn't considered dumb in front of the eyes of the world, like the public all over the world, but in the circle that I traveled in. What was interesting, on the same day Diana was stripped of her title as Princess of Wales, she was wearing this stunning black velvet off the shoulder short dress where the photographers had a feast. Unfortunately, Camilla tried wearing the same dress without any accolades. I had to laugh at her. The very woman whom she wrote off as a bimbo, Camilla wanted to emulate. The plot thickens. Trigger point number 2, which is a little personal, but I'll share it with you. Trigger point number 2 involves a prince, but a prince in the circle of a religious arena, not a real life prince. I attended an international church called ICB. And while I was attending this church, there was a man there, an American, white American, had 3 children, had a wife, looked like the Brady Bunch, but a smaller Brady Bunch. And it was perfect. Well, one day, very early on in my time at ICB. I had just the service had just finished, and I went out into the foyer getting ready to leave church. And, I would say this, I was always the odd one out. People around me had a solid support system, but I did not, because I was one of those people that liked traveling to different countries in the world. Well, as I was coming out, I saw this man staring at me. And he not only was staring at me, he was kneeling down on one knee and looking at me like, I guess, totally bewitched. And I thought, well, Todd, you know who I am. And he was just staring and staring at me. And I felt embarrassed. And I turned around quickly. And all of a sudden, I turned around to face the pastor, who was staring at me, trying to see how I would respond to this man. Well, what I did nothing. I just sort of like moved out of the way. And I thought, my God, your wife, you're married. If this woman saw how you looked at me, it would be embarrassing. And unfortunately, I would be blamed. So here the story goes from what I've started telling you. So I lived in Spain. I attended this church. I described the situation that happened. Now, back in the year 2000s, early year 2000s, there was an African mafia that was present in Barcelona and most of Spain, because Spain is just right before the African continent, and a lot of people came over, a lot of immigrants came over. Now, the ones that came over that were not well educated, some of these women basically had to turn to, working as a sex worker, to be quite honest. Now, I'm Black and British, and my background is from the West Indies. It's an African descent, but I'm not straight out of Africa. And furthermore, I was in Spain, in Barcelona, working as an in-company English teacher. So I was teaching, I had my TEFL certification, and I was teaching English as a second language to students in company, online, or face-to-face. However, after this incident, people started, I don't know how they got this impression, I wasn't doing anything, but they started looking at me as though a word got around that I was a prostitute, basically, a sex worker. Now, they couldn't accept the fact that here I was, a Black, moderately educated woman, and that I was teaching in company classes. They had to degrade me and say, well, she's a Black woman. Yes, she's African. She's just like the rest of them. She's uneducated, and she's a sex worker or a prostitute, and she's after our religious prince in the church. I'm after him, not that he was after me. Of course not. I'm after him. The poor little rich slave is after this white man. So that's basically it, how they wanted to play it. And so I was basically degraded and condemned, because they saw me as unworthy to fit their prince in their very white privileged, even though they called it an international church, very white privileged church. Well, I had to endure this embarrassment, and I endured it up until 2008. And then something very interesting happened. The truth revealed itself, and a lot of people were left with dirty faces and a lot of embarrassment. Well, I was self-employed and I had to get my taxes done. So I asked one of the African men at the church if he knew of a good accountant to help me. And he said that he did. So I was grateful and I met with him and I went to the accountant so he would help me with my taxes. And there, this African man saw all my papers, all my papers from when I first came to the country in 2000 and up until 2008. And he says, Melody, you have been working as an English teacher. It came out as an affirmation, but it was really a question wanted to ask me. He goes, you have been working as an English teacher all this time. I said, yes. And I just started working as a self-employed English teacher a year ago. So therefore, I need to get my taxes sorted out. That's why I asked you to bring me to this accountant. Well, you should have seen his face. His face dropped to the floor with utter shame and embarrassment. And I guess since word got out that I had to be a prostitute, could possibly be anything else, you can imagine word circulated to church and said, it's completely not true. It's a lie. So everybody looked very embarrassed. The guy that brought me to get my taxes done, he says, I am so sorry. I didn't realize that you really were an English teacher. I said, yes, of course. I was an English teacher. But do you think my reputation really changed that much? No, it didn't. They wanted to believe what they wanted to believe because I was not good enough for their prince. As if to say, I'd want to be associated with a married man. As if to say, I couldn't find anybody that was worthy of being in a committed relationship with me without them being married. It's pitiful. But the good thing about it, I was able to change my status a little bit from being a bimbo. Well, who's to say that sex workers are bimbos? That's a very dangerous profession. But, you get the impression that they wanted to write me off as a bimbo and a prostitute, and I had no brains. So that reversed itself with an odd tone of embarrassment as they looked at me and they saw the truth. But they still wanted to hold on to this fake reputation to make them look as though they were right. The last trigger involves a film called East is East and Grace Kelly. So first, let me talk about Grace Kelly. Grace Kelly was a phenomenally beautiful Hollywood actress. She had the most simple features, but they were perfectly balanced. Absolutely incredible, and was enormously talented. She was in love with someone else, but her friends in Hollywood wanted her to leave Hollywood. Some of it, I think, could have been competition and envy, and some of it is because Grace Kelly aired herself and said, I need to get away from Hollywood. This is not the right environment for me. So there was a plan put in place for her to leave Hollywood and to marry some elite. So her friend was on the train going to Monica, and she met Prince Rainier III of Monica, and he wanted to get married to an American starlet from Hollywood. and he wanted to get married to them for specific reasons. And the specific reasons was for money. Had nothing to do with love. He wanted to marry somebody that was rich, that could economically enhance the economy of the principality of Monaco. So they met and they started dating. And by now, the prince, their parents were happy with the coupling. And of course, Grace Kelly's mother and father, added and aired that they did not like the man that Grace Kelly was actually truly in love with. So they got married. And what was most unfortunate is that he turned out to be very much like a Prince Charles in the sense that he had many, many women. He was unfaithful to her several times in their marriage, at least having 4 or 5, maybe 3 different women at a time, and in all his infidelities. The year before he had 3 women, the year after he had 4 women. Who's to say? But he didn't care. He was not committed to that relationship. She was just basically a prop. And it so happens deep down that she was terribly, terribly unhappy. The only way that she found happiness was amongst the 3 children that she gave birth to. What a sad story. And then when she died in 1982, her car went over like a ravine with her daughter in it. The daughter survived. She had a stroke, though. Princess Monica had a stroke, Grace Kelly, and died the next day. And of course, you saw Prince Rainier grief-stricken publicly, crying. People had to hold him up so he could walk down the street behind the coffin of his wife. Now, I think he probably seriously felt a lot of pain, but I also think he felt tremendous guilt because of how he had behaved in his own marriage, and that he was not sincere about his love for Grace. The next trigger is, this trigger with Grace Kelly, the situation did not change. There was a trigger, and the trigger is that they got married for the wrong reason, and it just played itself out. It didn't reverse itself. Nothing changed. But with East is East, it's quite an interesting story. It's a wonderful British comedy about a man from Pakistan who marries a white English woman and has 2 children. Now, that's all well and good. But the thing is, and this happens to a lot of people, a lot of immigrants that come to different countries, especially Anglified countries all over the world, hoping that they can take their culture with them and raise their children as though they're from the country that the parents from, and it's not possible because they were raised in England, they were raised in the British culture, and there's nothing you can do about it. Well, anyway, the film starts off with this man. He's Muslim, of course. The boy is Muslim. The oldest boy is about to get married in this arranged marriage. And what's interesting is that he doesn't want to get married, but he hasn't told his family why he doesn't want to get married to this woman. And so he immediately goes and tries to get married to her. He lifts up her veil and he sees, oh my goodness, this woman is absolutely stunning. She's so beautiful. And he thought, I can't marry her. And the reason why he can't marry her is because he's gay, which is, of course, is a no-no amongst the Muslim world. And he runs out of the mosque because he can't marry her. And in this situation, I think what he did was really brave, because he said to himself, this woman is so beautiful. She deserves a man that truly loves her. And I deserve to be with a partner that I truly love and that truly loves me. And that's not a woman, it is a man. And I think in this particular trigger, the situation was reversed only because this man had the guts and the confidence and the courage to do what was right. So those are the three triggers that I've discussed with you. And we come to the end of this segment. I hope you enjoyed it. Hope you enjoyed the content. If you liked it, please give it a thumbs up. It helps with the algorithms. And if you want, you can subscribe. It doesn't cost anything. It's up to you. So it's your choice. And I just want to leave you with a phrase that I normally say. Healing is a lifelong gift we give ourselves, mind, body, and soul. Healing is a lifelong gift we give ourselves, mind, body, and soul. Goodbye. Thank you. Until next week.